In a continuation of resume writing, for part 2, we're going to talk about tips for writing the winning resume and the basics. So I hope you've watched the master resume, and so we're going to move on from there and talk about what to do with the information on the master resume. So you've got that all organized, and next thing you have to do is decide how you want the resume to look. Do you want to use a traditional chronological resume that moves from your most recent job backwards? Or do you want to be a little creative and try a functional resume which focuses more on your skills and abilities and less on the places that you got those skills and abilities? So a functional can be used for someone who maybe has a gap in a resume. It can be very nicely used for someone who's wanting to change careers or to move forward from where they have been. And it has a nice look to it, and it focuses definitely on the skills and abilities that you're going to bring to the workplace today. And it just lets them know what you have in your knapsack, if you will, of skills. So the other resumes that might be possible would be a combination of the chronological and the functional. And then for someone who has a whole lot of school but not a lot of experience, there is an academic resume. And there will be information at the end of the video about where you can find templates on the Workforce Center's website to get copies of those so that you can edit for your own use in the different types of resumes. Next, you need to think about your skills and how they are going to transmit on the piece of paper. You don't want to just write, I can change light bulbs. First of all, on a resume, you never use the words I, me, or my. It's all written in third person because the resume is nothing more than a marketing piece to help you move forward to that interview. So you've got to win the reader's attention to get that interview scheduled. So you want to put it in professional language. So if I was going to apply for a maintenance job where I was going to be changing fluorescent light bulbs and I was willing to get on a ladder and do that, I might say that I can change light bulbs, or I could say something like install and maintain lighting implements. That's a more professional way to state that. You don't want to be too fancy, so it sounds like you've copied and pasted something from the internet, but you want to keep it very specific. One of my biggest pet peeves is someone who starts out a bullet on their resume with responsible for. And I always wonder, what does that mean? Does that mean, let's say the bullet was responsible for a multi-line phone system. Does that mean that I sat and answered a multi-line phone system all day? Or does that mean that I supervised people who answered multi-line phone systems? Does it mean I repaired multi-line phone systems? So responsible for is very vague language and should not be included. The 2017 bywords for writing the resume are brief and clear. So you want to be brief, to the point, and you want it to be very clear about what you're saying. Any of your bullets of your skills should all start out with an action verb. There's a lot that's been studied about the brain and how it works when it's reading information like this. And starting out your bullet with an action verb will allow the reader to be able to actually see you in their head doing the work. So you want to be sure and keep it specific. You want to use bullets because that will be more brief, more clear, and you want to use those action verbs. Your action verbs should pay attention to the tense. If maybe you're working a little bit now, you can use a present tense action verb like work, file, perform, facilitate, supervise. But if you are talking about jobs in the past, then you would use the past tense, like worked, performed, supervised, facilitated, filed, those kinds of things. So you want to pay attention to the tense and you want to be consistent. The slide also says that you want to use lots of keywords, and we're going to come back here in our next segment and talk about those keywords and what they are and how important they are to use keywords on your resume. The next thing that you need to think about is what it's going to look like on paper as opposed to the resume that you're going to upload to a website. The paper one that's going to be pretty, that I'm going to have all formatted, it may have some lines on it, I'm going to bold some things, I might italicize some things, and then I'm going to put it on nice paper and hand it to someone. You can be a little more creative with, but when it comes to uploading that resume, there may be some problems. If you use a resume that you have uploaded from the internet, so you've got a template, it's got nice little boxes to fill in, so you've got your education box, and you have your work box, and you have your contact information box. Well, in the world of computer programs, all of those little boxes have language behind them that created those nice boxes that allow us to very easily fill those boxes. Looks great when you print it out on paper, but when you upload those to websites, the website is going to read those sheets of paper, theoretically, sheets of paper. They're going to read the things you wrote, but they're also going to read the language that created the boxes, that created the pretty resume. So there might be some distortion in your resume when it gets uploaded. Now, for an employer's website, very seldom do we get to actually see what we've uploaded. We're fortunate here at the Workforce Center that we have Kansas Works, and when we upload a resume to Kansas Works, we can actually see it on the screen. We can see what it looked like, see what we've uploaded. I have seen resumes where they've used all the little boxes and filled those in, and all those little boxes have moved on top of each other. And that's the way it prints out. So the words that you've typed that are the most important are hard to read because they're on top of other words. I've seen it where all the boxes move off to the right. And so half of your lines are off in cyberspace somewhere. I had a customer that I printed out his resume and I laid it out for him to look at. And I said, what do you think of this resume? He says, well, that's mine. I think it looks pretty good. And I asked him, how would I know that? Because he had put his contact information in the header. And the header is a formatted box in Word. And it deleted the header when it uploaded to Kansas Works. So the resume had no contact information. It didn't have anyone's name on it. It was obviously difficult to tell whose work history or whose resume that was. So you want to be very careful about using very technically formatted pages to upload. And one of the best ways to avoid that is to go to the Workforce Center website, and we'll share that with you at the end of the video, and you can use the templates that we have uploaded there in the job seeker section on our website. The next thing we want to talk about are some do's, some things that you need to do. You want this, again, to be a good competitive resume, so you have to pay attention to some details. The first thing is, what kind of font should I use? Well, there are 5 fonts that are kind of the popular fonts for 2017, but they're also popular because they are very easy to read. They're very easy, they come in different sizes, so the font you can change, but because the font is different, you can manipulate your page and your white space. You can manipulate, if you've got too much, you can make it smaller. Now, size-wise, you don't want to go too small, but on the slide, you'll see that I've listed 5 that are the most popular, the most easy to read this year. They're all exactly the same size, and yet you'll see how the different fonts show up differently in that size. I've marked through Times New Roman because that's an old font, and the folks at places like Career Builder, Monster, Indeed, they say that that's old-fashioned. So if you want to be up to date with the newest fonts, use one of the first 5 there, and maybe change out of using Times New Roman. The font size is important. It should be no smaller than a 10 and no larger than a 12, except of course for your name, because your focus is marketing yourself, so your name needs to be a little bigger. It is interesting that there's actually some statistics that tell us that font size 11 is read first. So it's easier to read. It may be because lots and lots of people are also now using font size 11, but it's a good place to start. And then if you need to manipulate your white space or your pages or your number of lines, you can do that from there. And you want to proofread and spell check very carefully. Again, talking about our brains and how they work, we have worked so hard on this resume that we begin to read through it, and we read what we know we meant, not necessarily what we actually wrote. So we hand it to someone else to read, and we might find that they look at us and say, what did you mean by this? It's because we left a word out. Or possibly in the realm of spell check, we all use that quite a bit, hopefully. But the question would be, did you mean to, or to? Did you mean through, or through? I actually had a customer that had 10 years experience working in manufacturing, and in particular in warehousing, and he was looking for a warehouse position. and he got an interview, and I wonder at the time, was it because he submitted a resume where he said he had 10 years experience in a whorehouse? Whorehouse, warehouse, spell check didn't catch it. And so he didn't proofread well enough, and I don't know whether he got that job or not, but it's something to be aware of and to make sure that you use someone else to look over your work so that they can help you edit and get it to the best possible quality you can. Some more do's. You want to focus on your accomplishments, not just your job duties. In every job that I've ever had, I always had to empty my own trash. I was responsible for that. But that's not on my resume. That is not one of my rock star skills or my superpowers. I can empty my trash, but I don't necessarily want to do that as a career. So you need to focus on the things that you are really good at, the things that will stand out, the things that employers might really be looking for, especially in the career that you are looking for. So you want to focus on those accomplishments, and it's best if you can make them quantifiable. The example on the slide says that this person worked on a sales team. We changed that up and said that they increased the customer base, which resulted in a 10% growth in overall sales. Again, talking about how the brain works, a person that's reading the resume is reading letters formed into words. When you throw in a number, so you make it quantifiable with a number, it will cause the brain to stop and wonder why the number is there. Is it 10% growth? Is it $10 million profit? Is it supervised 10 employees? Why is the number there? Now, the one caution I would give in the number is that the number can also work against you. At the top of a lot of resumes, I see a claim to fame is 35 plus years experience in something. Well, today, in today's job market, all that really tells me about that person is that they're old. And so we need to revamp that a little bit and put maybe 10 plus years, because 35 is more than 10. A little background about today's job market. We are now this year in what's being referred to as a gig economy. I can remember as a teenager wanting to be in a rock band, and I wanted to play a gig. So I understood what gig was, but I didn't understand how that applied to my career, my job. Well, the statistics tell us that in a 40-year work history, someone that's in their 20s and their 30s right now will have 7 different careers and 3 jobs in each career. And if you do the math, that's about 2 to 3 years per job. So longevity is not recognized as very important like it used to be. Folks are not staying in the same job, and it's not a negative anymore to be a job hopper. As long as you stay at least a year in a job, a couple months, yes, you're going to be a job hopper. But if you're staying a year, maybe 2 years, and finding something different, the way that's being perceived now is that you're just acquiring new and more skills to move forward with. So de-emphasizing the numbers of years that you've worked in something can be very important, because age can be a critical piece of this if they perceive that you're too old to do the work. And then we mentioned earlier using action verbs, so that visually in the reader's head they can see you doing the work. Next, there's some mistakes that we make. I made a mistake when I wrote my resume. I was on unemployment. I came into the Workforce Center. I brought in a 7-page resume that I had typed on a typewriter. I didn't know for sure whether I was supposed to upload or download, and I thought that copy and paste, cut and paste maybe involved scissors and glue. So I didn't know all of those things that I needed to know to have a good competitive resume. Too long was 7 pages. Too short, half of 1 page. So you need to find a happy medium that reflects the skills and abilities that you're bringing to the table today that help you move forward. 1 page is great, and we're going to talk here in a little bit about what HR people do when they look at your resume the first time. So 1 page is probably the best, but I took my 7 pages, I used a functional, and I turned it into a 2-page functional. 2 pages is fine, just as long as you fill 2/3 or 3/4 of the page. If you've got 1 page and 2 lines, then you need to manipulate your white space or your font on the page 1 to get it all into 1 page and not go on to that second little bit of that second page. Next mistake that we make is disorganized, or we've got poor formatting. We'll have customers bring in resumes and we'll take a look at it and we'll say, well, I see you've used 3 different kinds of font. And they'll kind of look at it like, I did? Well, I thought I used Arial. No, you've used Times New Roman here and used something else here. And they don't know how that happened. And I always like to tell my customers that Microsoft is magic. And you just need to be sure that when you have it in the font that you want, you immediately save it so that it doesn't change on you, because it will. The same with the bullets. Sometimes you'll be going along and there'll be little boxes. Suddenly there'll be little circles. Attention to detail is critical. We have an opportunity here at the Workforce Center a couple times a year to have employers in front of us, and we get to ask them questions. And one year we had Spirit, Walmart, and Via Christi Hospital at the table, and the question was asked, what's the #1 thing that puts a resume in the trash? And all 3 pretty much simultaneously answered spelling errors and not paying attention to those details. And so my question would be, would you want an emergency room nurse that did not pay attention to the details? Remember that your resume is an opportunity for the future employer to see you on paper before they actually get to meet you. If the resume is sloppy, if the formatting is bad, if there's misspelled words, that's going to reflect on you as a person, on you as your work ethic, and they're not going to, probably you'll go into trash pretty quickly if they perceive that you're not very articulate or you cannot express yourself, you can't spell things correctly. Attention to detail on this piece of paper is critically important. How about being too flashy? My question would be, why are you making it flashy? Why are you putting your picture on your resume? Is it because you're going for a modeling job? Okay, that makes sense. But there are reasons to be flashy, and then there are people that just think that's going to get folks' attention. I'm going to put bright colors on there, I'm going to put lots of lines and lots of graphics. That's not always a guarantee, and it can mess with the upload in the computer systems when you upload those resumes. So there has to be a reason to be flashy. I would also suggest, if you're going to do a flashy resume, to also do a traditional resume, black and white, on just a black font on white paper, and see which one gets the most interest, see which one gets you those interviews. I had a customer that said, what about doing a video resume? And so I asked him, why would you do that? Well, it turned out he was working on a degree, he was wanting to do videography, so it made sense for him to do a video resume, but then I also suggested a traditional resume. So if you're going to be flashy, there has to be a reason to be flashy. Faulty writing style, poorly typed, we've pretty much covered that one. Let's go on to including unrelated and irrelevant information. I'm a grandma, I have 2 killer dachshunds, I have a grandbaby on the way, and I love soccer. Why would I tell an employer that? They want to know about my hobbies. Those are things that should be left to the interview if they want that information. Sometimes folks do include some personal information that might not be helpful when it comes to the interview. That would be, in particular, one of the things that first comes to mind is I attend church every Sunday. Okay, what if the job requires you to work a Sunday? They're going to look at that and they're going to say, well, here's a person that's never going to be available Christmas, Easter, and if we ever need them on a Sunday, we can count them out. So they may never interview you because you've already checked those boxes off the list and they won't be interested. So you want to be careful if you feel compelled to include personal information. I'm going to talk a little bit in one of our next videos about including volunteer information. That's not necessarily a bad thing. That can be a good thing. So there is some things that you might want to include. Poor descriptions of experience or education. And the example I like to use here is folks who accomplish a high school diploma by taking the test for the GED. As a kid, I remember hearing that those kinds of folks were doing things they shouldn't. They should have stayed in school. They were maybe worthless because they didn't have attention to what they were supposed to be doing. And so I had a bad stigma in my mind about folks who had to do the GED. As I've grown, as I've had some experience with folks who do come back and accomplish the GED, if I passed out the math portion of the GED to all of you, you would find that only about 4% of us can actually pass it. And I have a great deal of respect for anyone as an adult who has the commitment to come back and take those tests and accomplish that diploma. The state of Kansas feels the same way. If you have taken the GED exams here in Kansas by an accredited institution, then you will receive a Kansas high school diploma, and that's what you want to put on your resume. Because unfortunately, there are still some folks who see a stigma that goes along with the GED. Also, if you have college, it's not necessary to include high school. However, you never know. The employer reading your resume might have a tie to either the high school or the college that you attended, so that might be one thing you would have in common. So you need to use your judgment on whether you want to include those things, especially college. If it's relevant to what you want to move forward with, then it would be very important to include that information. Number 7 is sending an unfocused or generic resume. Remember, we're going to use our master resume to then create targeted resumes. So if I had been a cook and I never wanted to cook again, dropping off a resume at Spirit would probably not get me a job, because unless they need cooks at Spirit, I can't imagine that that would be very helpful. So you don't want to just drop off a resume. Also, you don't want to drop it off and hope that someone sees it. You want to use the proper channels. You want to target that resume toward the jobs that you're looking for. Repetitiveness. Let's say I was a welder and I had welded 3 different places in my career, and I'd basically done the same thing at each career. I welded, and then I welded, and then I welded. So repeating the exact same skills in 3 different jobs is not as creative as using maybe a functional resume. You state the skills one time, and then you list the employers where you acquired those skills. It's better organized. It's easier to read. I can guarantee you, if you're saying the same thing three times, the reader probably stops at the second time they're reading. They don't read again because they know you've got those skills. Sending a resume without a cover letter can be a mistake if the employer wants a cover letter. So you need to read your instructions carefully when you're uploading. Does it have a place for a cover letter? If it's optional, I would always send a cover letter. A cover letter is nothing more than an introduction of your resume. It's like walking up and shaking someone's hand, telling them that you heard they had a job opening somewhere, that you're interested, you have these skills, and here's my contact information. Nothing more than that. And you write it in letter form, which lets the employer know that you understand the English language, how to write letters, and actually there's a template for the cover letter on the Workforce Center website to help you get that all in place. You would use the same font and the same style as your resume, and if it's required or if it's optional, I would upload one. If it's not required, they don't ask for a cover, I wouldn't worry about it, because not everybody has the time to read a cover letter. Misdirected would be just taking it in somewhere and dropping it off with the person at the front desk. The hope is that they'll give it to the right person, but knowing who it should go to is going to give you an advantage over the next person that just drops it off at the front desk. The receptionist may never take and pass that on. Finally, references. Don't put those on your resume. They're going to take up extra space. The trend that we're seeing today is that most employers will interview from your resume. They will call you for an interview, and then they'll check your references. Your reference list should include 3 to 5 people that you know professionally, whether they're former coworkers or someone just in your life that is not related or is not the person that you go to dinner with on the weekends. So it should be someone that you know professionally so they can speak to your work ethic and your skills. Should be someone that likes you. That's very important. They will say nice things about you. They need to know that you're using them as a reference. You need to have a good phone number, and you need to keep that updated. You need to have a good email if they have it, and keep that updated on your reference list, so that if someone tries to contact them, they won't get a phone disconnected message, or they won't get a missent email message. If they don't have an email, then I would definitely include a street address and their city, state, and zip, so that they can contact them in the future if they want to check your references. I would take them on a separate sheet of paper, same font style and everything, with your contact information at the top, and I would take those with me to the interview, but I would not include them with the resume. And that's it for part 2, resume writing. Join us for part 3.